trying for an undefeated regular season. And because I had the greatest colleague in the world, Steve Knutson, I was at a lot of those games that year. When we came to the end of the season, we found ourselves 11-0 and going to Nebraska for an away game to try for that undefeated season. The game was going to be played the day after Thanksgiving on Black Friday, so I called up my nephew, texted him, and said, hey, would you be interested in the day after Thanksgiving, we'll all be home in Fairfield driving out west to see the Nebraska game? And he said, yeah, Uncle Craig, sounds great. So I got us tickets, and we headed west. On our way there, I asked him, I said, now, have you ever been to an Iowa football away game outside of Kinnick Stadium where they play their home games? And he said, no, I haven't. I said, well, let me lay some ground rules for you. When you're at an away stadium, it's different than being on home turf. I've been to a lot of Big Ten stadiums in my lifetime as a member of the Hawkeye marching band. I got to march at Northwestern, and their fun little stadium, and their fans were fantastic. We got to stay over the next day and march at Soldier Field for a Bears game. I've marched at a Vikings game. I played in the Metrodome for a Minnesota game. My freshman year, we went up to Michigan and got to play at the Big House. Now here I am. It was my second game, by the way. Second time I ever played with a major college marching band. I came a small town kid from a small town of Fairfield with a couple people, 100 people in the stands, to my second game. I'm playing in front of 106,000 people. And I've got cymbals, which is the loudest instrument. And everybody's going to hear me if I make a mistake, right? My knees were just shaking. But once we got into our routine and we started playing, I realized, oh, my positions are just the same. My music is just the same as we practice on my home field as is a away field. It doesn't matter where God is playing to me, just carry out the mission. And it went just fine. So flash forward to 2015 it was, when we're on that doorstep of the undefeated run. As we went west, I said, now, when Iowa loses the game, a road game, the visiting fans kind of pat you on the head patronizingly and say, oh, good job, Hawkeyes, maybe next year, and you walk out and everybody loves each other. But in the rare occasion that Iowa would win a road game, you have to, We can't say a word because they're going to be angry. There'll be people who will be drunk. It's in every place, right, when you're on foreign soil. Yeah. And I said, if we happen to win, when we walk out, don't say a word because people are looking to pick fights. I'll just look at you and you look at me and we'll smile and we'll have that moment together. So sure enough, Iowa wins the game. Finishes the year 12-0. And my nephew and I are pouring out of the stadium with tens of thousands of Nebraska fans behind us, just giving us an earful. Oh, you're the worst 12-0 team in the history of college football. You're not going to beat anybody else. You're going to get your rear end kicked in the Big Ten title game, but they didn't say rear end, okay? So, and I looked at my nephew, and he looked at me, and we had that little moment, and that was that. But things are different when you're on foreign soil, right? The rules are different. And that's where Jeremiah comes to us today with these very familiar and comforting words. For I know the plans I have for you, says, plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you a future and a hope. We did a sermon series a few years ago, this might have been even before your time, where we asked you what are your 10 favorite scriptures, and we preached on them in descending order from 10 to 1. And I want to say this scripture from Jeremiah was like your number 3 or 4. I mean, it's way up there. You love this scripture. Time, high school, senior, it's right there. For I know that I have the plans I have for you, right? But it's a bit of a misnomer, because those high school graduates are coming from home to somewhere else. Where Jeremiah gives us these words is where God's chosen people were already plucked out of their homes and placed in Babylon in exile. They were in a foreign country, and they were around people who hated them and didn't have anything to do with them being in their home turf. And at this point, God gave Jeremiah the prophet the words to give to us to say, listen, even though you're in dire straits, you're on foreign soil and everyone hates you, I still have a plan for you. I'm still your God and I still love you. He also tells them in this scripture, God's chosen people, that you're going to be in Babylon away from your home territory for 70 years. 70. Now, scholars have debated why why 70, the year 70 was chosen. And for the most part, they tend to agree that no one lived longer than 70 in those days. So to say you're going to be there 70 years is everyone in this room's lifetime. No one who is hearing this was going to see the promised land. You're going to live throughout the rest of your days in exile. So hunker down, Jeremiah says. You're going to be here, and these people you're among are going to be your people. So you need to pray for them. You need to care for them. And it's a practical sense that Jeremiah tells us this, because their fate is going to be your fate, Jeremiah says. If there's a famine or a starvation in the land, you're going to starve. If they don't do well, you're not going to do well. So get to know their names. Get to know their families. Get to know their hardships. And be among them where God has planted you, even on foreign territory. You know, in the waning days of my career as a broadcaster, a broadcast journalist, one of my favorite stories was the Iowa State game, to cover the fans. You can probably guess why. And my favorite story, one of the very last stories, was brother versus brother, a house divided. Everyone loved that story. And because you got one son, you know, who went to Iowa State and the other who went to Iowa. And I won't tell you which one is right and wrong, but you can figure that out on your own time. And you'd have two flags flying on the same pole, you know, Iowa State. And it was a news story because families just hated each other. I mean, there was just such vitriol. They wouldn't even speak to each other, live in each other. But you know what? A funny thing happened after the game, no matter who would lose. What do you think happened? We all got in the same car and they all went home together, right? Right? Because at the end of the day, we're all family. Is not the same true with God? Are we not family with those maybe who don't root for the same things as us or live in the same place as us? Maybe their skin color is a different tone. Think about all those people struggling on our borders and all over the world that don't look anything like us. Are they not part of our family? Does God not call us to care for them? Or how about this? I know many of you drive from great distances, and we really appreciate that, to come be here on the corner of 10th and 3rd Street, 3rd Avenue. And I know you drive by a lot of places. And I know a lot of you didn't even bother coming to Westminster because it wasn't our church, but that's a whole nother sermon, okay? There's something familiar and comfortable about being back at first. I get that. But God's not calling us here to have a holy huddle on Sunday morning and then forget about everyone else the rest of the week. No, God is calling you to be transplants in a foreign land. In people that don't look like you or think like you, or maybe they make less or more money, go to different schools than your kids go to. God's calling to get to know their names, to pray for them, to understand their hardships and have sympathy and empathy for them, because we're all a part of God's family, and their fate is going to be your fate. And if you don't think that's true, Jeremiah stamps it with the last reading that Katie read for us, and saying, listen, God, I am going to do something new. I'm going to make a new covenant with you, not only you, but the whole world. And covenant's a fancy religious word we use. It means divine promise between God and God's people. God says, I'm going to make a divine promise with you, and I am not going to break it. It's unbreakable. And my new covenant is this, that I will love all people through my only Son, Jesus Christ. And I call you to do the same. At the end of the day, are we not all family? God has called you to